My family scoffed at my computer thing for a decade. Tonight at Thanksgiving dinner, I revealed I owned the vineyard they were toasting with. Their faces froze. Thanksgiving at Mom's always tasted the same: dry, overdone, tough to swallow. Even before the turkey, the house reeked of cinnamon candles and white wine breath, just like always. The crackling fireplace sounded like a soundtrack for someone else's life. A phony, comfortable postcard you'd never send but always get. I lingered at the entrance a second too long, coat still on, boots damp from Mom's recently power-washed driveway, listening to the kitchen laughter. Especially my sister's, loud, purposeful, exuding that practiced ease that made you forget how sharp she was beneath the charm. Mom spotted me first, her smile all teeth and agenda, the same one she used at HOA meetings. "There she is," she announced, wiping her hands on her apron as if I'd tracked in something contagious. "You're late." I was not. Not really. I walked in at 4:15 just like every year. But it never mattered. With Mom, I was always off by something. 5 minutes, 3 pounds, 1 diploma. "Traffic," I mumbled, shrugging off my coat. "You know how the 405 is." She didn't. She never left her gated community unless it was for a charity brunch or Jessica's latest TED Talk or whatever she was up to. "Oh, Jess is already here," Mom chirped, flinging the name at me like a velvet glove, concealing a brick. She got in early, said she wanted to help set up. Of course she did. Jessica had a way of showing up early in the story and still getting the last word. I could already hear her voice from the dining room, gushing about a trip with Mark, her second husband, who never seemed to blink. He was the kind of guy who'd wear a blazer to a barbecue and call it elevated casual. I walked into the kitchen, and there they were, the unchanging cast, their roles only solidified over the years, like a family sitcom that forgot to end after season 3. Jessica, in cream cashmere and pearls, her makeup so flawless I didn't even try, grinned like she'd won something. Mark was already on his second glass of Pinot Noir, chuckling at a joke with no punchline. Dad leaned against the pantry wall, arms folded, his gaze fixed somewhere to the left of the conversation. He did this often. He stayed on the sidelines, always listening, never interfering. Mom steered me to the counter like a stray cat she wasn't, sure was house-trained. "You can help with the rolls," she offered, handing me a dish towel. Not the turkey, not the stuffing, but the buns. Something store-bought, inconsequential. Something I could burn without anyone noticing. I smiled, nodded, and draped the towel over my forearm like a waiter in a retirement home dinner theater. For the next 40 minutes, I drifted like a ghost through a house I knew too well. I helped pass dishes, refilled cranberry sauce, and complimented the linens I'd seen at Home Goods 2 weeks prior. No one asked about my job. No one asked how I was doing. They just wondered if I was still doing that thing with computers, as Mom vaguely referred to my business. She didn't know the name. She'd never asked. No one had come to visit the house I bought last year. When I got my first 7-figure contract, I celebrated with my cat and an expensive bottle of champagne from a bodega on Vine. But Jessica got accolades for switching to oat milk. Mom eventually brought out the nice china, signaling our official transition from casual gathering to evening performance. This is when the questioning started, the soft jabs, the subtle pecking order. "Mark just made partner," Mom announced, as if he'd cured cancer. Jessica blushed, waving it off, claiming it was just a formality, her way of bragging twice in one sentence. "And of course, Jessica's app will be available in the first quarter," Mom added, scooping more mashed potatoes onto my plate without asking. I looked across the table and realized something important. Everyone here assumed they knew who I was. The quiet one, the late bloomer, the one who never quite got it together. But what didn't they know? I had built something bigger than all their titles combined. I just never invited people to the show who couldn't handle not being in the spotlight. Jessica smirked, glancing over. "So what's new with you, anyway?" she asked, like she was asking if someone was still single. I saw Dad watching me from the corner, his expression unreadable. Mom leaned in a bit too eagerly for comfort, lips pursed, as if she was fighting the urge to offer unasked-for advice. Mark sipped his wine, trying to seem interested. I took a deep breath and smiled, placing my napkin just so. "Nothing big," I answered, watching the candlelight flicker in Jessica's earrings. "Just met a few goals I set for myself. Quiet ones," I said, looking right at Mom. "I don't usually invite people who don't want to see it." Silence. Pure, dense, tension-slick silence. Even the cranberry sauce seemed to freeze mid-slide. Mom blinked. Jessica's lips parted as if to speak, but she didn't. Mark peered into his wine glass, hoping for a solution to appear. And me? I just smiled, because I knew what would happen next. I had planned it, rehearsed it, stacked the deck, laid the bait, and the show was finally about to begin. Let them squirm. Let them ponder. There's a moment just before someone says something cruel that feels like all the air gets sucked out of the room, as if all the oxygen decided it wasn't worth staying to see what happens next. That's what it felt like. Not just stillness, but silence with its fingers wrapped around your throat. We'd finished the turkey, the potatoes, the second bottle of Pinot, and Mark's 7-minute pointless story about a Seattle business trip. I hoped we'd get through it all without the customary rib jab disguised as parental concern, but I should have known better. I usually do. Mom reached for the butter dish without looking at me and remarked, "So, why do you think you've never been as ambitious as your sister?" Just like that. Casual, as if asking if I wanted extra gravy. No warning, no setup, just the scalpel straight to the bone. Jessica didn't even flinch. Mark smirked as if he'd just watched someone slip on ice. Dad seemed to want to shrink into the chair cushions, but that was his usual expression. I didn't answer right away. I let the question hang there, unpleasant, and unwanted, above the roasted Brussels sprouts and stuffing, like the ghost of every slight that had ever occurred at this table. I looked at Mom first. Her face was calm, her eyes soft, as if she truly believed she was helping. Then I looked at Jessica, who was now carefully wiping the corner of her mouth with her handkerchief, exuding amused detachment. I could almost hear her thoughts. She's going to cry, lash out, or both. But I didn't. Instead, I slowly placed my fork down, folded my hands in my lap, and smiled. Not a snarky smile, not a wounded one. The smile you give when you know something. No one else does. "I met my goals," I answered, still beaming. "I just never invite people who don't want to see it." I swear to God, even the green beans stopped moving. Jessica's fork remained in midair. Mark blinked as if someone had taken a photograph. Dad cleared his throat, suddenly engrossed in his sweet potatoes, and I watched Mom's jaw clench for a fraction of a second. A slight shift like a glitch in the Matrix, but then it passed. "Well," she said, buttering a roll with absolute precision, "that's nice. That is nice." The linguistic equivalent of slamming a door in someone's face and smirking, but that was enough. I had drawn first blood, and the ripple effect was still visible around the table. Jessica tilted her head slightly, as she always did when she wanted to make something intimate seem professional. "What kind of goals?" she inquired casually, as if asking what type of kale I preferred in my smoothies. "I mean, I didn't know you were working on anything big." I shrugged, sipped my wine, and added, "Nothing flashy. Just got my team settled into the new space upstate." I watched as the words landed. Jessica blinked first. Mark looked at her, perhaps wondering if he'd missed something. Mom's brow twitched, the same tick she got whenever someone said anything she disagreed with. "You moved?" Mom asked, sounding nonchalant, as if reading from a teleprompter. "I thought you were still in that little apartment downtown." "That was years ago," I added, stretching the pause just long enough to make it feel intentional. "I bought a place last year. Needed more room. The company's grown a lot since then." "Company?" Jessica's voice was flat, but I could hear it. A mix of astonishment, curiosity, and yes, a hint of fear. The kind of fear that comes from realizing the story might be shifting beyond your control. Yeah, I replied casually, sliding my wine, glass forward for a refill I didn't need. Been running my own business for 6 years now. Started it back in 2015, so yeah, it's been over 10 years. No one said anything. Not a word. The math didn't add up, and I knew it. But that wasn't the point I wanted them to notice. I wanted them to think about it, to focus on it, rather than on the fact that they had all missed everything else. It was bait, and I dangled it. Mark eventually spoke. What kind of business? His voice was stiff, and his eyes darted back to Jessica, as if he wasn't supposed to ask. I offered him the same smile I'd given to clients who underestimated me. Wide, pleasant, and a little too serene. Software tools, small business platforms, a couple of government contracts. Boring stuff. Oh, he responded, as if I'd just told him I collected stamps. Jessica reached for the gravy boat, as if it might save her. That's great. I had no idea you were doing all that. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You should have said something. I figured if you were interested, you'd ask, I told her. Simple, direct, the truth too sharp to touch. For a minute, no one moved. Mom then picked up her wine glass and said, Well, I'm just glad everyone's doing so well. That was her way of retreating. She didn't want to dig any deeper because she'd already fallen in and hadn't realized it yet. But I saw it. I saw it all. The fracture in Jessica's confidence, the way Mark shifted in his seat, and Dad's expression when he looked at me, as if he was finally seeing something new. My phone vibrated in my pocket. One brief tremor. I took it out without seeming to care. With one glance, I knew it was the email I'd been waiting for. Confirmation of something that, if I wanted, could flip the table, metaphorically and possibly physically. I returned the phone to my coat pocket, tucked the information away like a sharpened dagger, and took another mouthful of turkey. The show was just getting started, 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, while Jessica was posting stage selfies from her rooftop yoga class, and Mom was probably hand-picking the place cards that would eventually line this battlefield of a dining table. I was planning something far more intricate than a side dish menu or a floral centerpiece. I wasn't coming to dinner this year to participate. I was coming to reveal. This wasn't about conflict. I wasn't going to yell, cry, or wave around a litany of complaints like a martyr. No. It was going to be something softer, colder, more surgical. Because if there's one thing I've learned about vengeance, it hurts more when it's quiet. It began with the wine. A small action, but one that meant more than anyone at the table could ever comprehend. 2 weeks before the event, I delivered a case of my best reserve, a bold, deep Syrah created in partnership with a vineyard up north, to Mom's house. But not under my name, of course. That would have ruined everything. Instead, it came from a fictitious boutique company I'd created specifically for this occasion, complete with a beautiful label and a made-up French-sounding name she'd believe was expensive. I knew she'd be thrilled to serve anything that seemed exclusive and upscale, something her guests would appreciate. The bottle was already on the table when I arrived that day, and it was half empty by the time we got to the main course. I watched them drink, compliment, and swirl it around in their arrogant crystal goblets, unaware they were toasting their own ignorance. But wine was just the beginning. The real move was the person I invited. Mom had technically issued an invitation to everyone, but I nudged her. I suggested she invite a couple of family friends we'd known for years but hadn't seen in a while. I made sure one of those people was Aaron Shaw, a name Jessica hadn't heard in a long time, despite her efforts to ensure no one ever heard it again. Aaron previously worked with Jessica when her startup was still active and seeking investors. They had been close until the scandal. Jessica quietly buried it before it could reach Mom's wine-soaked ears. The thing about Aaron is, she doesn't forget, and she doesn't forgive. Erin arrived with her usual charm, a sweet smile, and a bottle of Prosecco, and Mom greeted her like a distant cousin from a family branch she didn't recognize but was too proud to admit. Jessica flinched when she saw her. Just a flicker, but I caught it. Mark didn't. Mark was too busy laughing at his own jokes and trying not to stare at Erin's legs. He isn't subtle, not even on holidays. While Jessica was in the kitchen pretending to help with the gravy, Mark moved in too close to Erin and murmured something about networking that made her raise an eyebrow. I filed it aside. Just another thread. Jessica lied at supper, bold-faced, smooth as glass. She told everyone her new position was Chief Strategy Officer for a wellness tech startup in Palo Alto. She even mentioned the company, which I knew from a Google alert I had placed months earlier. Yes, the company had been acquired, but it wasn't. By choice. It succumbed to legal scrutiny. I knew this because I had paid for the damn court records. Jessica held no leadership positions. She was consulting for the same public relations firm that had helped her sanitize the story in the first place. It might have been funny if it wasn't so offensive, and still, no one asked. Mom beamed with pride. Mark nodded as if he had memorized the script. Dad sipped his wine and remained silent as usual. I could have spoken up then, but it wasn't time yet. No, I wanted someone else to peel back the first layer from the outside, where Jessica had no control over the story. So I waited, and I watched. Mom felt it was time for a toast near the end of the meal, when everyone was full, warm, and sipping freely. She always gives a sappy speech about family, thanks, and how grateful we are. It's usually innocuous, but this year, as she raised her glass of my wine, she looked at Jessica and remarked, "And to my beautiful, brilliant daughter who's always making us proud. May your new company bring you the success you deserve." Jessica grinned like a politician. At a donor dinner, all teeth and polish. She lifted her glass, and then Erin spoke. "Oh, I didn't know you were back in tech," she remarked softly, her voice as light as chiffon. "Last I heard, there was still a pending investigation with the SEC, but that must be cleared up by now, right?" Silence. Actual silence. Not the kind where people take a moment to reflect, but the kind where everything comes to a halt because no one knows what the hell just happened. Jessica's hand froze while toasting. Mark blinked, puzzled. Mom tilted her head in that puzzled, brittle manner, trying to decipher what she'd just heard. Erin simply smiled and sipped her wine before turning to me and saying, "This is great, by the way. You have excellent taste." I caught her eye, held it, and gave a slight knowing nod because she knew someone else had now followed suit. There, it was. The first layer peeled. Jessica's years of polishing, the first real crack in her mirror. And the best part? I hadn't said a single thing. The thing with stress is, you can't always see it coming, but you can feel it pulling at the corners of every syllable, stretching smiles a little too broad and making laughter sound hollow like a cough disguised as amusement. That dining room, bathed in gentle chandelier light and the flickering shadows of half-burned taper candles, had shifted from a performance space to something raw, brittle enough to fracture with the weight of a syllable. Jessica's posture had slowly changed from confident lean to careful containment, as if she could hold herself together with sheer willpower if she only clamped her teeth hard enough and refused to blink too quickly. Following Erin's incorrect comment about the SEC, a heavy, bitter silence descended over the table like a fog no one wanted to breathe. Except Jessica didn't respond immediately. She did what she always does when cornered. She stalled with a polished non-response. "Oh, you must be thinking of someone else," she remarked with a short giggle that barely softened the sharpness in her voice. "There's so much gossip in this industry." She looked at Mark, evidently expecting him to join in. He tried, God bless him. He tried, but his timing was terrible. He reached for his glass of wine, knocked it over in his haste, and sent a dark crimson arc of Syrah shooting across Mom's cream linen tablecloth. It soaked in quickly, blooming like a bruise, and nobody moved for a moment. "Jesus, Mark," Jessica snapped, louder than she intended. And that was the moment. That's when everyone stopped pretending. "It's fine," Mom answered hastily, reaching for napkins, her voice tight with forced patience, as it always was when the image shattered and she had to hustle to patch it before anyone noticed too much. But the wine stain was still there, silently, oozing into the cloth. Even though she was trying to mop everything up, no one was looking at the table anymore. Aaron grinned, not cruelly or gloatingly, but in the way a person grins when they realize they've opened a door and are now curious. "Who will walk through it?" "Funny," she remarked, leaning her chin against her hand. "Because I just spoke with a buddy who said they were still trying to get their money back from your last venture. What was its name again? Vital Glow?" Jessica froze. There was only one beat, but it was long enough. Her gaze flickered to Mom, and then back to Aaron. "I wasn't in charge of finances," she admitted. Her voice had become too flat to pass for calm. "I was advisory only." The conversation now had teeth. Mark reclined back in his chair, one hand still grasping the stem of his fallen wine glass, as if gripping something delicate might cause the ground underneath him to stop shaking. My mother, meanwhile, had stopped dabbing at the stain and stood there clutching a handful of wet paper towels, as if they were evidence in a case she didn't want to solve. I took a long, slow sip of my wine, then looked at Mom. In the quietest voice I could muster, "Do you remember when you told me you invested in Jessica's company last year? How proud you were?" The room inhaled. "You mentioned it was a portion of your retirement savings, correct?" Silence is not always quiet. Sometimes it feels like the floor suddenly collapsed beneath everyone, and no one knows where to land. Mom's gaze shifted from me to Jessica, and I saw it. The flash of terror, the realization. She had no idea the company was going out of business. She had not been informed that the website had quietly gone offline, or that emails sent to their support team were no longer receiving responses, or that Jessica had moved on, remaking herself as a thought leader in a different field under a new, fictitious title. Jessica's voice trembled as she finally said, "It wasn't like that," but she did not refute it. "You told her it was stable," I murmured. My voice remained quiet, but something had changed. Not angry, simply surgical. "You told her you had it under control." "I didn't know it would tank," Jessica exclaimed. And now she was unraveling, grasping the ends of the rope she'd spent years twisting into a noose she'd never wear. "Things change, okay? The market shifted." "Do you mean when the investors sued for misrepresentation?" Aaron offered, barely concealing the glint in her eyes. Mark rose up, mumbled something about getting air, and walked away, into the kitchen, or perhaps the garage, or somewhere that didn't include this table and the rising mound of secrets, collapsing under their own weight. Mom sat down gently, as if the chair was the only thing keeping her upright. Her face was pale, and she had no answer. There was no platitude, no scolding, only stillness. I looked at Dad, who hadn't spoken. In 20 minutes, and he was already looking at me. There was something odd about his eyes this time. Not disappointment, not surprise, but perhaps something closer to recognition, as if he'd finally heard the part of the story I'd been telling through my silence all these years. He did not grin, nod, or say anything, but I didn't really need him to. Jessica stood up. Her chair scraped violently against the floor, the sound cutting through the dense air. "I'm done," she announced, her voice cracking. "I'm not doing this with you." She looked at Mom, expecting backup, but none came. Then she turned and marched out, her heels clicking on the tile like gunshots. Mom stood frozen, staring after her. And I just picked up my fork and ate another bite of sweet potato casserole. I was not finished. Not yet. After Jessica stormed out like a politician fleeing a scandal, her heels resounding down the hallway, the door swinging with more drama than a soap opera cliffhanger, the dining room finally fell silent without feeling artificial. It was the kind of silence that follows a demolition, when all the parts are still suspended in the air and no one is ready to look at, let alone discuss the damage. Mark had vanished, probably retreating into the garage to order an Uber, or simply to pace and reconsider every life decision he had made since 2018. Erin was sipping her third glass of wine, completely relaxed, as if she'd just spent the last hour pruning a bonsai rather than detonating a landmine in the middle of a family meal. I rose up slowly, not out of haste or to be dramatic, but because I wanted a moment to breathe in a space free of tension and unspoken judgments. "I'll clear the table," I said, more from habit than anything else. Nobody argued. Nobody even nodded. Mom sat motionless, fists clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed not on me or the wine spill, but on the vacant chair where Jessica had been seated minutes before. Perhaps she was still waiting for her to return, to sweep in and smooth things, over with a half-truth and a well-crafted apology, but not this time. The story arc had concluded and the next chapter had already begun. I stacked dishes, scraped leftovers into the compost, rinsed the cutlery in cold water, and watched the gravy swirl down the drain like everything else that used to matter in this house. I moved slowly, not because I was exhausted, but because it felt tremendously wonderful to be in charge of the storm cleanup. For once, I wasn't the one explaining, apologizing, or reducing myself to keep the peace. I was the peacemaker. I was the storm and the eye of it. When I brought out dessert, it wasn't store-bought or wrapped in plastic like Mom's usual stash of sweets. It was my pecan pie, a recipe I had refined over the years, the one I created every fall but never took to Thanksgiving since it never fit the theme. I set it in the center of the table on the same linen runner that was forever inked with red wine regret, and sat down without saying anything. Dad went for a slice first, without hesitation. He cut it clean, took a mouthful, and closed his eyes, as if he were trying to recall something vital. When he opened them again, he stared at me in a way he had never done before. Not just that he saw me, but that he recognized me, in the same way you realize a fact you've been circling for years, but have never confronted. "I always knew you were the sharp one," he remarked quietly. Not intended for Mom, Erin, or anybody else. This was just for me. It was ridiculous how much that affected me, like a punch wrapped in velvet. I didn't cry or choke up, but something inside shifted. Something ancient, tired and worn from too many years of neglect. I nodded once more, in acknowledgement rather than gratitude, because it wasn't about the words. It was about finally being noticed. Then, without fanfare, I walked to the buffet and added the finishing touch. Another bottle of wine, identical to the one on the table earlier. Same label, same gorgeous gold foil packaging, but this time I placed it just in front of Mom and waited. She squinted, perplexed at first, then moved forward to read the fine print beneath the brand name. And then I saw it, the instant she comprehended. This is my name. The founder and principal vintner's name printed in a delicate script beneath the label, a product of my company. They had all complimented the wine, but no one knew who made it. They had commended the bottle as world-class, the one they'd sipped while celebrating a lie. That was mine all along. She stared at me, then back to the bottle and finally at Erin, who arched an eyebrow but said nothing. "Did you make this?" Mom asked, her voice cracking with disbelief. I nodded. "I own the vineyard. We launched it last year with a portion of our software sales. It's small, but doing nicely. We sold out our first run in less than 2 weeks." Her expression was not anger or pride or even humiliation. It felt disorienting, as if she had just realized she had been reading from the wrong script in the wrong play for years. "Why did you never say anything?" I picked up the knife, pushed it through the pie's flaky crust, and placed a slice on her plate. Then, with a calmness that could have been cold, I said, "Because ambition does not require applause. It only needs a plan." And with that, I poured myself one last glass of my own wine, leaned back in my chair, and let the stillness do the rest. The room did not explode. Nobody yelled. Jessica did not come back. Mark did not suddenly arrive with an apology or an alibi. Aaron left gently after dessert, with a genuine hug and a heartfelt thank you. Mom did not speak for the remainder of the evening. She sat there, staring at the pie, the wine, and all she had missed. Dad patted my shoulder on the way out and muttered, "You didn't simply show them, you taught them." I didn't need to understand the lesson. I didn't require validation. I needed some distance. As I stood outside under the cold November sky, wrapping my coat tight and inhaling the harsh air like it was the first fresh breath I'd had in years, I heard the door lock behind me. I did not glance back. That house no longer had any purpose for me. It's not their pride. It's not their consent. It's not their permission to be more than the quiet one in the corner. Certain bridges need to be burned because certain houses are never worth returning to. Some women build empires in silence. Let them wonder where the smoke came from.